We'll do a review on Likutei Sichos in Chelek Chavches. This is the first Sicha of the Parshas Behalosecha. We're learning in memory, in loving memory of Harav Levi Yitzchok ben Yibod L'Chaim Tov Meruchim Chaim Tzvi, who was a dedicated, successful shliach, passed away suddenly, and we're learning it to benefit his neshama, to hein nishmos yitzur b'tzir chaim. In this Sicha, this is really a Parsha Rashi Sicha, but it's really also a question on in the different Mefarshim that they ask, and the Rebbe is really asking how come Rashi doesn't explain that. And the surprising thing is the Torah seems to be talking about Behalosecha Sanedus when Aaron lights the menorah, the lamps of the menorah, and then the verse goes and tells us a halacha about the menorah, v'zeh ma'isa menorah miksha, that the menorah needs to be one piece and not put together from pieces, but one piece hammered out, stretched out. That seems to be not here at the place. This was learned in the Parshas Tetzaveh, Parshas Emer. Why are we talking about this here? We're talking about how to light the menorah. Actually, the Rebbe comes up with a gewaltige chiddush that according to Rashi, anyways, according to Rashi, this is actually the parshas of the menorah, and the Rebbe explains that while it all has to be made out of one piece, but still the branches they were separate. You can tell. Look, you can't see that it's made out of one. The fact that Yoiru Shivas Hamneres, the lamps are all shining towards the middle one, that tells us that continuously we are part of the same menorah. That's the Miksha Zov, and that's the message of this parsha, and that's why it belongs here, as we will see, and we'll go step by step. Aleph. Betchilas Parshasenu, in the beginning of the parsha, noch the psukim, after the verses, the pasuk says, Behalosecha Sanedes Amul Pnei HaMenorah Yerushiva Sanedes. Moshe is saying to Aaron, when you light up the menorah, the lamps, make sure that the lamps will face the front of the menorah, the main the menorah. Yoiru Shivas Hanedes, the 7 lamps shall shine. They should all be towards the middle lamp. And then the pasuk says, "Vayaskin Aaron did so. El mul pnei menorah hela nerisehogeon." That facing the menorah, he raised the notice. So this was the very specific direction to Aaron, how he is to light the menorah, and he did what he was told, that the menorah was lit and the candles, the other neighbors, they were facing the main part of the menorah. So after this verse stated in pasuk, seemingly there's another pasuk that stays in the pasuk. V'zeh ma'isa menorah. This is the act, the way the menorah is made. Miksha zohov. It is banged out of gold, meaning not attached, but banged out of the piece of gold, stretched out and made into the shape of the menorah. Ad yerecha ad pircha mikshahi, up till the yerech, the base of the menorah, also the flower, it's all one mixture, all made of that same peel, banged out. Kamare asher hera Hashem es Moshe, like the vision that Hashem showed to Moshe, Kenosah es menorah, so Moshe Rabbeinu made the menorah. This pasuk that discussed how the menorah was made, how does it fit in to follow up the command to Moshe Rabbeinu how we should light the menorah? Why are we telling us about how the menorah was built? Doesn't seem like this is the place over here. This should be discussed in the portion of Tetzaveh where the Torah talks about the menorah. Is Yidua was Mefarshim fragen, so it's known that what Mefarshim ask. In the erste psukim from the parsha, in the first verses of this portion, he talks about we're talking about the instructions to Aaron, how the lighting of the lamps need to take place. The Rebbe gives special instructions El Mul Pnei HaMenorah, Yerushivas HaNeros, how we should light the menorah, so they should face the main middle part of the menorah. So that's a command about how to light the menorah, not about how the structure of the menorah is. Uh, wegen dem Eufen von Maisa menorah, but how the menorah has to be made, the construction of the menorah, that was discussed much earlier in Parshas Truma, in the portion of Truma. But there, the Torah tells us about the different kalim and also the kalim about the menorah. In what is the shaykhs from Posik v'zeh ma'isa menorah to the Parsha? So what's the connection? The Posik tells the structure of the menorah. What does it have to do in this portion of it when we're talking about how Moshe Rabbeinu should light how Aaron should light the menorah? Why are we telling us how the menorah was constructed? Seems to be out of place. So what's the problem with Rashi? Because whenever there is a problem that is in the simple meaning, Rashi should address it. This is a question that arises when you learn in a simple way the simple meaning of the verse. Is nicht verstandig, so we don't understand. How come Rashi doesn't stop in his commentary on this issue here? Why does he discuss now how the menorah was constructed? We're not talking about the construction of the menorah. That was discussed in the Parshas Truma. We're talking about how Aaron is lighting the lamps of the menorah. That's the question on Rashi. How come Rashi doesn't say anything? Now, the Rebbe is going to bring down the Ramban. He says that even though the Pasuk said before that it was made out of one piece, so one can think that the Chatchila, the construction is that the way it's made. But then later on, if it's made piece by piece, that would be acceptable too. First time around it was done miksha, but then it would be acceptable. You might think that. So the pasuk is telling you, it always has to be miksha. So this is a new halacha that we have to repeat here. But besides, let's say, but that still doesn't explain. This should be said in Parshas Truma earlier, you should say, or in elsewhere. The Rebbe will bring down. Why bring it down in the middle over here when we're talking about how Aaron lights the menorah? Base. The Ramban is mevayer. The Ramban explains as der Tam hakosuf v'zeh ma'asam menorah, that what is the reason for the pasuk saying v'zeh ma'asam menorah is literally is to hint to us that tzarich l'toira l'doira shetiya miksha kihu ma'akabah. That is to hint to us that for generations to come, you need it to be made out of carved of one piece. Kihu ma'akabah. That is something which holds back. You can't light a menorah which is not made by one piece. That's why the Torah repeats it here. But that doesn't still answer why the Torah writes it over here, or Rashi. This should not be satisfying. So, but Nachal didn't move on. It's still not understood. Lepirush Rashi, and the Rebbe will explain, according to the Ramban later on. So, but according to Rashi, we want to know now how come Rashi doesn't address it, because the issue oich der din as oich ledoris is miksha, because also this halacha that it's necessary for generations for the future that the menorah always has to be miksha, and that's liikuva, that is to hold back. Without it, you don't have a menorah. You can't light the menorah. So even that halacha l'chayre gedav shtei nida. It should not have been stated over here, nor in the Friedike Parshas. Should be in the previous portions, either in Parshas Truma or in Parshas Emer. We'll see that also in the portion of Emer, the Torah discusses over there also about the oil and about the menorah, and we'll bring down soon with Rashi how Rashi explains that is also that's the mitzvah of the of the menorah over there, discussing menorah, as we'll see the difference between the Ramban and Rashi. The Rebbe will bring it down later. But just now, why would the pasuk teach us a halacha that for generations to come that you need to have miksha, that it has to be made, the menorah has to be made out of one piece, and otherwise it's not a good menorah? Why is the Torah telling it over here when we're talking about how to light the menorah, not before, whether it's on Parshas Truma or in Parshas Emer, which according to Rashi, that's the source uh, for the mitzvah. That's the main place for the mitzvah of the menorah is over there. Actually, not so much before, as we'll see in more details. So the Rebbe's question is, why does the pasuk bring down here v'zeh ma'isa menorah about how the menorah was constructed when we're talking about the mitzvah of Aaron, how he should light the menorah? Then the Rebbe brings down there is another interpretation. The Erachaim is masbir. The Erachaim explains. He learns that Behalosecha Haneres means the neres are the actual lamps. The lamp, you have the oil and the wick in the lamp. So he learns that Behalosecha Haneres, the Erachaim, means that you should bring up the lamps and put them on top of the menorah. The menorah had the branches, and you take the lamp with the oil and the wick, and you put it on top of the menorah. That means Behalosecha, when you bring up as haneres, you bring up the lamps, you bring them up on the top. Chaim says, since the pasuk says you bring them up, so that means that the lamps are not part of the construction of the menorah; they're separate. There's a lamp. The Rabbi said maybe Rashi also holds that way, but since it's separate, maybe you'll think if the lamp is separate, maybe the others are separate. So therefore, pasuk has to re-emphasize v'zeh ma'isa menorah after telling you Behalosecha Haneres. But besides, the Rebbe doesn't really fit. Why would we think just because the natives is also? But that we'll see. But the main thing is Rashi doesn't teach Behalosecha Haneres that it means to raise the lamps. Rashi says Behalosecha Haneres, you're bringing the flame to go up on its own. So Rashi doesn't even teach the Behalosecha Haneres like the Rechaim wants to explain. Let's see what the Rechaim says. The Rechaim is masbi. The Rechaim explains as the pasuk kul bavorenen that this verse is coming to caution us that we should not make a mistake in interpreting the verses. Since this letter says you should bring up the lamps, according to the Rechaim, this means as the neighbors that the lamps are not set in the branches of the menorah. Used to bring them down the noch zurück sein of the menorah, and then you would bring them up on top of the menorah. You'd Behalosecha. So since we see that the lamps are separate, they're not part of the menorah, they can be taken down, they're independent of the menorah. So that might lead you to think maybe other parts of the menorah itself, just like the lamps weren't attached, maybe the other parts of the menorah were not attached either. The Torah said before that they should be out of one piece. So you would think, as no the menorah is gemach geworden, that after the menorah was already built, is the talking chiv as is mixture. So there is no obligation that it needs to be carved out of one piece. Und das, was steht mixture. So why does the Torah write mixture the first time? Is no betchila. So when you're reading this parsha, if the pasuk would not add v'zeh ma'isa menorah, you would think since the lamps are detached and you bring them up all the time, up and down, so maybe the rest of them are the same thing too. The fact that the Torah says it has to be mixture, meaning originally, but after the original construction, later on, if you want to make a menorah when the menorah gets ruined, or you want to change the menorah, you can make it out of pieces. But Achar Kach says the Rechaim, you might think Yochalasis Kasha Yachbat, you can do as you wish. The part is the Posik Maisiv is a Maisa Menoira Mikshu Begoimer. As no, the act of the Menoira is carved out, it's one piece. As the Din Miksha is expected that the law of Miksha is also later on. Okay, that's what the Rechaim wants to say, that the Pasuk has to come here to caution us that it has to be made out of one piece, even though the Pasuk says, Behalosecha Saneris, you bring up the lamps. So while the Rebbe argues, while it may be true that Rashi agrees with the Rechaim that these lamps were not attached to the actual branches, but that's certainly not the meaning of the word Behalosecha Saneris. Behalosecha Saneris means that the wicks, you should light them so that they catch fire and go up by themselves. So you can't say that according to Rashi, one would think that since the pasuk is telling you to lift up the lamps, no, the Torah didn't say anything about the lamps. According to Rashi, the Torah was only talking about the wicks, how to light the wicks of the menorah. We cannot, however, explain so according to Rashi, like the Arachaim. We can't say so. Because although we could say, even according to Rashi's opinion on the Torah, the natives were not one part with the menorah. And therefore, you could say, since they're not one part, as much given the natives saved the menorah, that all the time you took it down and you brought it back up, the lamps to the menorah onto the branches. That's possible that took place, but still we can't explain the Rechaim's way according to Rashi, because first of all, the whole logic that since the natives are separate, that's why the rest of the branches could also be separate. It's not really that's and besides that, Rashi doesn't touch Behalosecha. Behalosecha means to light the menorah. Besides the fact that the simple meaning of the pasuk, it's difficult to say. As der Fun was the natives and given bazunder, the fact that the lamps were separate. And every day they were brought up onto the menorah. So that should teach us about the whole menorah, that it was all pieces. Since the place where the command for the menorah in the Parshas Truma, it's very clear. As the ganze menorah darf sein miksha, that the whole menorah needs to be of one piece. But it doesn't talk about the natives because the natives were not. So besides the fact that it was not even a svara that the Torah needs to caution us that it was one piece, because you might think it's not one piece like the natives. No, the natives are not one piece, but the whole menorah, the Torah says before, the whole thing should be one piece. Why would you even think? But besides that, is in the Pirush HaKosuv Behalosecha. How does Rashi touch the words Behalosecha? Touch Rashi Befedish. Rashi says very clearly, Al Shem Sha'alav Oila, because the flame goes up. Kosuv Bahadla Kosuv Moshe Ali. That's why when you light them, the Torah says Behalosecha, when you elevate them, because the flame goes up. Shetzorich lahadlik achet hei shalev v'seilim. You have to light it and wait to make sure that it's lit till the flame goes up by itself. And the flame goes up because Behalosecha, the natives, flame goes up. That's how Rashi teaches Behalosecha as natives. And not that you bring up the lamps to them, that is that man, as Rashi letting them Pirush in Behalosecha natives. So you see, Rashi learns the meaning of the word Behalosecha natives. Nit ad mizmaila the natives save their menorah. Rashi is not saying that you light the menorah on the menorah. If that was the case, how does Rashi know that that shall have a soila, that should be that it goes up and by law? Maybe it just says to bring up the menorah. Or maybe Azoy is doch mitoke mokel pirish Rashi. If Rashi learns that Behalosecha Sanedis means to bring out the lamps of the menorah, then how does Rashi have a source? What is Rashi's source? For Behalosecha as hanedis that it means to raise to raise the menorah. The pasuk read kipshute benglav. The Torah, the pasuk talks about a flame. Shall have a soila. We're talking about Behalosecha, a flame that goes up. We're not talking about no natives, no nothing. We're not. That's not the pshat. Natives man the who talked about natives? There's no natives. Behalosecha is talking about the flame of the shalheves. That's oila me'elo. That's how Rashi teaches it. There's no. If Behalosecha meant the kalim, then it would have no source for the fire. But that's the meaning of the pasuk. So since according to Rashi, it does nothing to do. The pasuk is not talking about putting up the menorahs on the menorah, putting up the natives onto the branches of the menorah, but the Torah is talking about how we're lighting the menorah. Like the shilos, the question is, "Favosh teido," that pasuk is a ma'isa going a miksha. So why does the Torah write it over here that this is the way the menorah was done? The Rebbe brought down the two interpretations, both from the Ramban, who says that the Torah wants to tell you that for the future, you need to be miksha. Why the Rebbe doesn't say that, doesn't explain, Rashi would not use that as an answer because that still doesn't belong here. It belongs in the Parshas Truma or maybe Parshas Emir. And the Rechaim's answer that he says that because it says you put up the kale, the neris, so maybe the rest of it was also made out of pieces of later on, only the first time. But first of all, the whole idea is a hard idea. But Rashi clearly doesn't learn that Behalosecha means to put up the neris. It talks about the flame. So we're talking about the flame. Why is the pasuk have to talk about over here how the menorah was constructed? V'zeh ma'isa menorah. And the Rebbe now in Nois Gimel going to ask another question from the Lashon of the pasuk. Nois Gimel. And now the Rebbe asks another question. The first, when he tells him about Loischa Hanedis, what is the Chiddush El Mul Pnei HaMenoida Ye'iru Shivas Hanedis? It already says before that he made the menorah in a way. The Rebbe is going to explain that it was the psilas that were directed when he lit them. That when he lit them, let's look inside. Gimel. We also need to understand what is the hisofi in their parsha. What is the addition of the portion? When you light the menorahs, that facing the front of the menorah, the middle branch, the seven branches should light. Der Tzivui schon gesagt geworden in Parshas Truma. This command has already been said. The portion of Truma was Sisas Neireiseho Shiva. Make 7 lamps. Vehelo es Neireiseho veheyir alever panel. When you bring up the lamps, the flame, it will shine towards the panel, towards the face of the menorah. So, what is the chiddush of it? Noch mehr. Since the construction of the lamps was in such a way, as he can so that they were turning towards the middle lamp. The Rashi is mefarish in Parshas Truma. As Rashi explains in Parshas Truma that the lamps were tilted; they were made in a way So he says, "Asay pi sheishes hanedis." Make the mouth, the opening of the 6 lamps, Shebiroshi Hakanim, which were the lamps that were on the top of the 6 branches of the menorah, Hayotzim Mitzideho, that go out from the side of the menorah, Misubim Klapehom Tzoi, make them leaning towards the middle. What is that going to accomplish? Kideshi Yuhanedis Kshetadlikim Meirim El Ever Ponel, so that the lamps, when you light them, they will be shining towards the middle. Musav Oiram El Tzad Pnei Hakonam Tzoi Shuguf Amanoida. The light will be tilted, will leaning to the side of the face of the middle branch, which is the body of the menorah. So the construction of the menorah was such that it shined towards the middle. Vipas bechlal atzivu of them. How does it even fit a command on this? B'shas hazoyizos b'derech hamela. This is the way it's automatically. The natives davon gemacht werden von zeh. The lamps need to be made in such a way that they will light the ongizok by the Asiya as instructed by the making. So what are we telling them now that you should light them towards the middle? And when that was the construction, so what is the chiddush over here? That seems to be the menorahs. Inherently, the lamps were tilted towards the middle, so they would light that way. And the Rebbe says that Rashi cautions and explains this by saying that in addition to the tilting of the cups itself, when Aaron lit them, he had the wicks tilted towards it, in addition to the whole cup being tilted, the wicks itself. V'yashleimar. As Rashi Bavorintes, Rashi answers this, and he's mefarish because Rashi explained Yoiru Shiva Saneris, the seven lamps would shine. So Rashi says, Shisha shal sheshes hakonim, the six lamps which are sitting on the six branches, shloishes hamizrachim peinim lemul hamtzoy, the three to the east, they're tilting towards the middle. And Rashi says hapsilois shabahen. We're talking about the wicks that's within these menorahs. V'chein shloishes hamarovim. Same thing is the three to the west. Roshei hapsilois lemul hamtzoy. The top of the wicks were towards the middle one. Therefore, was Rashi's Mishana B'Lushoinei Do. The fact that Rashi changes in his language over here. It says Hapsilois, Rosh Hapsilois. Rashi is talking about the wicks, the top of the psilois. Nit vipi pirushi beParshas Truma, not as he said in Parshas Truma. Pi Sheishes Haneris. Over there he says the mouth of the six lamps. Over there was something in the lamp, not in the wick. Is Muma. So from this we understand as do is a bezunder tzivutzar. This is a separate instruction to Aaron. As noisef of them was pi sheishes haneder seinem subim klape pzoi. In addition to the fact that the mouth of the six, of top of the six natives are all tilted, leaning towards the middle one, darf Aaron echmat sein die psilis. Aaron needs to tilt the wicks. That's the pasuk of here. Amul player nashor. Zay zol peine sein klape hamtzoi. They should turn towards the middle one. Was von dem hängt up, wie es wird sein der Yair of the Shivas Hanedis. Based on that, it hinges upon how the lighting of the seven natives will be if, when Aaron puts the heads of the basilicas towards the middle, then they will be lighting towards the middle. But this is in addition to the construction of the menorahs, the lamps themselves, but this was the wicks within the lamps. So now that we're explaining, the Rabbi explains that this is not the same thing that we learned in Parshas Truma. Parshas Truma was talking about how the construction of the lamps were, that they were wicked in a way that they were tilted towards the middle one. Here we're talking about Tzivur Aaron, that when he lights, he should pull the head of the wicks towards the middle one. So in that case, since this is an extra command from Aaron, so why does the Torah say it in a passive tone towards the middle of the menorah they should light? He should say, Aaron, Torah, you should light it in a way. It should be in a command, not in a passive. If he said that, based on this, we need to, however, understand the language of the verse in our parsha. It says, towards the face of the menorah, the seven lamps will shine, as if this is what's going to happen. He's not, doesn't tell us here the instruction that Aaron should make it that way. That this is the way it will take place. Since we're saying, like here, what's the addition to what we learned in Parshas Truma? That there is another instruction here in the Maisa Hadloka von Aaron, in the way that Aaron lights the menorah. Aaron should have said in the language of a command to Aaron, it should have said, uh, so that's the way you should light the seven natives. Unit yo iru, that they will shine as the natives on light, the natives should shine, but you should make them. That was a mitzvah. It's a new mitzvah for uh Aaron. Why is it said you iru shiru sanedis in a passive tone? So what the Rebbe says, while they can't, what the chiddush in this pasuk is that Aaron needs to be making it, that he should light the wicks and tilt them towards the middle one, both sides towards the middle one. Why does the Torah use the language your iru will shine, not Torah you should shine? So now the Rebbe is going to bring out that Rashi's view and how he differs from the Ramban. According to Rashi, there are three psukim, that three places in the Torah which talks about the menorah. We talk about it in the Parshas Truma. That's the construction over there the first time by the menorah. Then we talk about in Parshas Emer, where the Torah talks about the oil that they used for bringing up the Ner Tamim. And then we have our Parsha, Zemai Menorah mixes of. And these three psukim, according to Rashi, the Rebbe will explain, the main construction of the menorah is actually Parshas Emir. The portion of Ata Tetzaveh, because over there it's talking about what they use for the Mlechas HaMishkan, but the main parsha that wants to discuss the menorah is the Parshas Emir. And the Rebbe is going to say that the Parshas Bamidbar and Parshas Behalosecha, that's called the Parshas HaMenorah. Let's look inside. Let's see. Aleph. So Behagdim. In the Parshas was Retzach wegen der Menorah, gefindt man am Achloikes zwischen Rashi und Ramban. In the portion that talk about the menorah, we find a disagreement between Rashi and Ramban. Aleph. In Parshas Emer, wo steht der Zimur, in the portion wo steht der Tzivui, portion of Emer over there, where the Torah says, "V'yikchu eilecha shemen zayis zoch kosis lamoir." They should take pure olive oil that has been crushed for the light, for the moir, so that you will bring a constant light outside of the curtain that is over the testimony of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the pasuk says, Aaron should arrange it outside. That's where the pasuk says. So Rashi zokt Rashi. Rashi says, Zu parshas mitzvahs hamenorah. This is the portion of the mitzvah of the menorah to light the menorah. Now we already find this is not the construction of the menorah. We're talking about the mitzvahs, the mitzvah that you have to do of lighting the lamps, the mitzvah of the neiros. Now, what do we say? We say in the pasuk in Ba'ata Tetzaveh. Parshas Ba'ata Tetzaveh le'nemra elo al seder melechas hamishkan. In the Ba'ata Tetzaveh, in which we find also the mitzvah of adlokas haneris. So that is just because the Torah is talking about how the work of the Mishkan, the various different kelim, also talks about the keli of the menorah. So over there is the farish tzedek hamenorah. So over there, when the Torah talks about lighting the menorah, it's not the main place. The main place where to light the neiros is in Parshas Emir, and in Parshas Ba'ata Tetzaveh, it's just briefly because it just discussed about that you built a menorah. What are you going to use the menorah for? So the Ba'ata Tetzaveh tells you what you're using the menorah for. But the main portion of menorah is Parshas Emir. That's what Rashi says. The Ramban Dorten in Parshas Emer is Chelek of Rashi. Over there, the Rambam disagrees on Rashi. Unlernt, and he learns Tzoyrech HaParsha HaZoyis. What is the nature of this Parsha, Parshas Emer? Legabe Adlokas HaNedis, with regards to lighting the menorah. What is this Parshas Emer telling you? Asham beParshas Tetzave leOmar El Yarech Isai Arinu Bonov. Over there it says the arrangement should be Arinu Bonov about lighting. They have to light. They have to light the lamps, but it doesn't say that it has to be on a menorah. Maybe just light. Loy b'mashma, ala menorah, below menorah, on top of the menorah, without a menorah, im tishaber oitav chulu. Let's say it's broken or it gets lost. Can you just light the lamps not on a menorah? Just light them. So in the Parshas Tetzaveh, the Ramban says the Torah didn't tell you where that it has to be in the menorah. It just says Yarech Isa Arnubonov. So you can think whether he has a menorah, it's okay. But now in Emir, Amar Befedish, the pasuk says very clearly Ala menorah haTorah. Shelo yadliku ala menorah to haTorah. That it has to be that prepared by Arnubonov, that has to be on the menorah haTorah. Which means that this is a detail of telling us that the lighting of the neiros must always be on the menorah according to the Ramban, but it's a hemshech from the Parshas Tetzaveh, which is the main place of the lighting of the mitzvah of the menorah, is in Parshas Tetzaveh, and Emer is just merely adding a detail that you need the tafken of menorah. According to Rashi, is the other way around. According to Rashi, the Parshas Emer is telling you about lighting the menorah. And the only reason we have it in Parshas Tetzaveh is just to tell you what it was used for, because we learned in Lech Samishkan that they constructed a menorah. Thus haste, which means Loit Rashi is Parshas Emer der Tzivu from the Parshas Mitzvah menorah. According to Rashi, the portion of Emer is the command for the portion of Mitzvah Hanedes to light the menorah. Und Leut no Ramban, according to Ramban, is das a hemshech on a prat. The Parshas Emer over there is a continuation, and it's a detail in the mitzvahs at Lokas Nerish in Parshas Tetzaveh. In the mitzvah of lighting the lamps, which the posik discussed in Parshas Tetzaveh. So this is the detail, tells us as the darf sein dafka la menorah must be dafka on the menorah. So that's the way Rashi and the Ramban differ in the Parshas Emer. According to the Rashi, Emer is the main place of lighting the menorah, and Parshas Tzaveh is just by the way because of the construction over there. It tells you what you used it for. According to the Ramban, the main thing is Parshas Tzaveh, and here is adding a detail that it has to be dafka on top of the menorah. Number two, that's as far as Parshas Emer. But Tchilas Parshas Sein is Rashi Mefarish. In the beginning of Parsha, Rashi explained Loma Nismecha Parshas HaMenorah. So Rashi says, why is the portion of the menorah leParsha Nisim, to the portion of the Nisim? Rashi uses the language, the portion of the menorah, not Parshas Haneris, but the Parsha menorah. Lefi sheksharo Aaron Chanukas Hanasim Chulu. When Aaron saw the inauguration of the prince, they brought every day a korban each nasi. They brought the agolis, and then they brought the special korbanos every day. Nosechad layom, each day. What nasi brought, but Aaron didn't bring, and the tribe of Levi didn't bring, so he felt bad. So Amalei Kodesh Baruch Hu Chayecha, by your life, promise you Shulcho Gedolim Mishalohem. What you're doing is greater than theirs, because you light and you make good the lamps, you fix the lamps and you do the lamps. That's greater than the Nisim, what they do. So you don't have to feel bad. That's what the Rashi learns. The Rambam fragt of Rashi learned anders. he asks Shaula and he learns differently. As kishem with the parsha in Emir is ahi sofa of the parsha from V'ata Tetzav. He says just like the portion of Emir that Ramban learned, it's an addition to the parsha V'ata Tetzav. It gives you a detail as the adloke muzayin al menorah dafke needs to be dafke the menorah. The Ramban learns the same thing is in our parsha. Al derech zeh is the parsha. This parsha is also continued. Bekan kasher hishlim lahaskira komas hamishkan. When he completed to mention how they raised the Mishkan, over here by the Shmini Lemeluim, the 8th day inauguration, the Hishlim Oit Kol Dina HaNedis. So then he also concludes further the laws of the Nedis. Bitziva Sheyiyu Shiva Sanedis Kulon Delkes Ledairis Al Mupnei HaMenorah. What the Pasuk is coming to tell us that for generations to come, you need the lamps to be lit, always facing the menorah. That's the detail that the Pasuk is coming to tell us. Kasher hiskir b'maisam menorah chulu, like he says in the Maisam menorah, which is loy. So what are the two extra details we learn? First of all, loy bilti menorah we learn in Parshas Emir can't light the menorah, the neiros without having a candelabra, without the menorah, Torah. And also, this is the other halacha we learn here. It must have them shine a lever panel, which means that this is part of the laws of lighting the menorah. The main law is Parshas Tetzaveh. One extra detail is in Parsha Emir, and one extra detail over here in Parshas Behalosecha. When Azoy soll euch sein ledoires, was the far, and this also needs to be for the generations to come, always facing the menorah, was the far lehiske beparsha azois b'oil moyed. That's why in this pasuk it doesn't say oil moyed, because she came in Mikdash Chulu, because this is the way it needs to be for generations being based on Mikdash. Okay, so in total, it turns out, according to the Ramban, all three parshas are talking about the lighting of the menorah, Tetzaveh, Emir, and Behalosecha. According to Rashi, they're talking about different things. The portion of Tetzaveh is part of the Melech Mishkan. The parsha of Emir, that's the Mitzvahs HaNedis. And the portion of Behalosecha is the Parshas HaMenorah. Laut Rashi seine voran drei besondere Parshas benegeit zu der Menorah. According to Rashi, there are three different portions as it's as it relates to the menorah. The tzivui bereish parshas tetzaveh is a tale from the tzivui v'seidem lechsa mishkan. The command in the beginning of tetzaveh, that's a part of the command and the order of lechsa mishkan. That's why it was brought down over there from parshas truma. Tetzaveh is connected to the parshas truma, in which the Torah says to construct the menorah. The Torah tells you part of it is what you're going to do with it. You're going to light the menorah. Parshas Emir is Parshas Mitzvah Menorah. Rashi said that's the portion of Mitzvah Menorah. Parshas Seinu Behalosecha Saneres is Parshas HaMenorah. Rashi calls it, this is the portion of the Menorah. Nit Parshas HaNeres v'im Parshas Emir. This is not the portion of Neres, but Rashi said this is the portion of the Menorah. There is a Menorah, there is Neres, and then this is the portion of the menorah. Aber Leutun Ramban is Parsha Tetzaveh, the Parsha from the mitzvah of Lokas HaNedis. According to Ramban, the Tetzaveh, that's the portion that has the mitzvah of lighting the lamps. When the Tzivuim, the Parsha Zemer, the Parsha Seinu, the extra commands in Parsha Zemer and our Parsha and the Protim, they're both details, v'hashlomis, and completing in din hadlokas haneres and the laws of lighting the lamps. As there's dav zayin, if a menorah davke needs to be on a menorah, v'sheyirul lever poneh needs to face the face of the menorah. For generations, we always have to do it this way. So the Ramban is one mitzvah with details. The mitzvah is in Parshas Tetzaveh, and the details is in Emir and Behalosecha. According to Rashi, The mitzvah is in Parshas Tetzaveh, and that's not the Parshas Emer is the mitzvah, and Parshas Tetzaveh, it's part of the order of the Seder of the Mishkan, and by us it's Parshas HaMenorah, not the Parshas Neris. So now, based on this, it makes a different how we're learning Zemai HaMenorah, Mikshozov, what the Pasuk says it. Is it part of the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, or it's part of the mitzvah of the menorah? Based on the above, there's a different Rashi and Ramban. Than Pasuk also as it relates to the verse. This is the subject of the Sikha. This is the way the menorah was built. So the Das Ramban, according to the Ramban, the Balder Teuchen HaParsha Behalosecha Saneres Mupnei Menorah Yuru Goymer. Since the whole idea, this parsha of lighting the menorah and it should light is a hemshech ledine haneris, that this is a follow-up, a continuation of the laws of the lamp, which is hadlokas ha-menorah, lighting the menorah, is oich der siyum der posik v'zeh maisa menorah miksha, that the act was of the menorah miksha, aprat un ha-shloma in din haneris. So that becomes a detail and then completes, it becomes the law of the lighters, how you're supposed to light. To live mekayim zay mitzvahs adlokas haneris, as the Rebbe said before, needs to be on top for generations, on top of a menorah. It has to be carved out. To live mekayim zay mitzvahs adlokas haneris, in order to fulfill adlokas haneris. Kshem v'di hadloket dav zayin of ha-menorah davke. Just as the lighting needs to be dafken menorah, which we know from the Parshas Emer. Unid b'loy menorah. You can't just light without a menorah. That's we learn in Parshas Emer, according to the Ramban. Davdo zayin of a menorah. It needs to be on what kind of a menorah? What's his mixture? What type of a menorah? A menorah mixture. If it's not mixed, there's ma'akiv that lokas haneris that holds back that lokas haneris. You can't fulfill the mitzvah of lighting the lamps without having a menorah and without having a menorah of miksha. That's what we learn out from the posik. That it has to be miksha. That's the only way to fulfill the mitzvah of lighting the menorah, lighting the neiros menorah. However, like Pirush Rashi over, but according to Rashi, was roofed on the Parsha Menorah canal. Rashi refers to this as the portion of Menorah. Kumtois as the Iker the Parsha Seinu is Vega Maisa Menorah. The main thing is about the act, the Menorah, the construction of the Menorah. Nitat Lokas Haneris, not the lighting of the Neris. Welcher wird gesagt in dem Posik Veze Maisa Menorah Miksha. The Torah is telling us about how the menorah is constructed. It's not about how you're supposed to light the menorah on a mikshadike like the Ramban said menorah, but it's talking about how the menorah needs to be constructed. What does this all mean? We're talking about lighting. We're not talking about building over here. Rashi calls it parsha menorah, but what does it mean? It's the chaver tzorich bir. The parsha that doch lechayre beiker nit wegen der menorah gufa. The parsha doesn't talk about the menorah itself. Nor wegen the mitzvah lokas haneres. What does the pasuk say? El mupnei hamenorah yirushivas haneres, that they should light. What are you saying? That this is about the menorah itself, about the parsha menorah. Is the fun verstandig? So from this you understand, as euch der inyan fun el mupnei hamenorah, this that you are lighting it and it's facing menorah is negeya nit azoy to the kiyum mitzvahs hadlokas haneris. This is not so much importance so to the fulfillment of the mitzvah how to light the menorah, nor to the etzem gufa menorah, but that's important for the menorah itself. That the menorah should be lighting over there, and that's why Zemaisa knows so that it be miksha. So what's going on over here? So the Rebbe brings out that according to Rashi, this is all Parshas HaMenorah. And because it's Parshas HaMenorah, Pasuk talks about Yeiru, you should light to shine. Behalosecha and Yeiru. Yes, but that Yeiru makes it a Menorah. That makes the Etzem Menorah, makes it a Menorah. Because here we're talking about the Parshas HaMenorah. We're not talking about how to light it, but we're talking about that makes it up a Menorah. The Rebbe says that the fact that you light the menorah in a way that it shines, that represents that this is really one menorah, that it's the same menorah. The miksha gets represented even though there are branches over here. Well, there's more in them. Explanation. In the psukim beparshas truma, was ver geret vegemaisa menorah. In the verses, in the portion of truma where it talks about how the menorah was made, state vasiso menorah zov toir. Should make a golden menorah, pure gold. Mikshot yasa menorah, you should make it all banged out. Yerecha, the base, the kone, the branch, v'eha, the cups, the goblets, kaptereha, the buttons, procheha, and the flowers. Mimeno you should all be made out of that gold itself. The noch steht in Pasuk, then the Pasuk says, V'shisha konim yitzim mitzudeho. Then there are three branches that come out from the side. Shloisha knei menorah mitzida echad. Three branches of the menorah from one side. The shloisha knei menorah mitzida sheni, and three branches of the menorah on the second side. Kumtois. So it turns out, as afal pivas the ganze menorah is given mikshach azov, even though the entire menorah was made out of one banged out, is obedah chilik zwischen dem konam tzoi gufa shel menorah. There's still a difference between the middle branch, the middle stick, the menorah itself, the goof of the menorah, midishisha konim, and the six branches. In gufa shel menorah hat sich nit angesehen kein besondere chalokim. In the body of the menorah, you didn't see any other parts. So it's a chlor gesehen and kli. So this is one thing, one vessel. Zach, it's one item. Mashenkin the sheishes hakonim, as opposed to the six branches. Is given from them zelbun eshe, even though they were created from the same chunk of gold, they were also, as Rashi says, is ober laachre asis hamenoira nit given niker begoli. After the construction of menorah, you couldn't tell openly vidos is ein zach mit gufa shel menorah, that this is one thing with the body of the menorah. Shas ober aron is mekayim. When Aaron fulfills the command to raise up the lamps and that they should shine towards the face of the menorah, is durch them was alle sheishes hanedes leichten op menorah, through the fact that all the six lamps are facing the main menorah, mul neirham tzoi, towards the middle lamp. Vert niker, now you can tell, need belois vidos menorah, not only that this is one candelabra, nor vi alle neder seinen achelik, but all of the lamps are a part fun of uprat tofel, and they're also secondary to gufo shel menorah neder hamtzoi, the body of the menorah, the middle lamp. That lighting them points to the fact that they're all secondary, and that they are all lighting to the main part, to the menorah, the middle menorah. So it turns out, therefore, as afal pivos bepoil, is there tzivu donegeya to their maisa hadlok van Aaron. It turns out that even though actually this command over here is important to the act of lighting that Aaron did, the pa'ula for Aaron in the psilis, what Aaron did in the wicks to make them towards the menorah, nit a pa'ula farbund mit hasiyas hamenorah. He didn't do something which had to do with the construction of the menorah. He did something had to do with the lighting of the menorah, the maisa in pihaneres, the act in the mouth of the menorah. That was done. He didn't do that. He's over toichna v'gidra negeya. But the content and the boundaries, what is it? It's important to the menorah gufa. because that represents that it's all miksha achas the menorah. Und the far stated in Pasuk the Lashon Toir Shivas HaNevis doesn't say you Aaron should make sign the seven neighbors. That would mean as besigna shel tzivut to Aaron. That Aaron is like we're talking about the command of Aaron. Yes, Aaron does it, but he's doing it to accomplish something about the menorah. Nor your iru Shivas HaNevis. The seven lamps will shine. While the Teuchen von together from Al Mulpnei Menorah, because the content, the definition over here that it should be to the menorah is not for Aaron to light it that way, but for the menorah to become. Is nit nor adina mitzvah in the meiser hadloka shel hagavra. It's not just a halacha and a mitzvah in the act of lighting of the person of Aaron, nor adin in the chefzer shel menorah. But this is a halacha in the object of the menorah. Bichdei zu herausbringen dem Inyan, in order to express the idea, v'al mul pnei ha-menorah is a chelik from Parshas ha-menorah. That facing the menorah is a part of the portion of the menorah, nit from Parshas mitzvahs ha-nedis. Not as a part of the mitzvah of the nedis, according to Rashi. This is the menorah. Is the posik meisiv? The posik adds though. To tell you that the Yoiru Shivas HaNedis is accomplishes the Maisa HaMenorah. That way it was done. It was made one carved out and one banged out. Everything, from the base to the flower, it's all carved out. And more so. Der Post gerechnet on nitois bazunder di Menorah. The Torah doesn't say about the menorah, gufa shel menorah midekanim, what the branches, givim, kaftoidim, the goblets, the buttons, the prochim, flowers in Parshat Truma. Nor ein clothes they can loshen ha-menorah loshen. Ha-menorah pircha. The menorah, all one, this is all, Torah is telling us, the ma'is ha-menorah, this is Shivas HaNedis, is the all, to keep it one menorah, to make it all mixture. B'yeshleimar, das ist der Diuk Haloshen in Pirush Rashi. Gufo shel menorah kulo v'chol ha-toli boy. Rashi says the body of the menorah, all of the menorah, and all what hinges on it. While doi is again nit nor the etzim zach as kula miksha achas in the meifin hasiya, because it's not just that it's all been carved out the way it's made, being parshas truma, nor v'alzi zachelik from the gufa menorah, but everything is part of the menorah. Gufa shel menorah v'chol ha-toli boy, and everything which is part of the menorah. It is Maisa Miksha Zohab. It is all the body of the menorah, which is the middle stem, and all the hinges on it. Rashi doesn't count out the branches, the part, everything. This is all because this is just to demonstrate that this is not in the construction, but this is to demonstrate that everything is part of one big menorah and everything that hinges on it. So that's why this is the way it becomes one menorah. So the Rebbe says, according to Rashi, the reason that the pasuk brings down v'zeh ma'isa menorah is because this explains the reason for the Mopnei HaMenorah and Yehiru Shivas HaNedis to create that wholesomeness of being that it's one menorah. Okay, but in that case, the Rebbe still asks that from the Lashon Rashi, it almost seems like that it is a mitzvah that Aaron got to light the menorah because he felt bad that he's missing out on the mitzvah. Not that the mitzvah of Aaron is to tell us to make a one, that the menorah is one, the act of the parsha menorah, the act of the menorah. It seems like it has to do with the on Aaron. Aaron gets to do the mitzvah. It's the hadloka. Hadlokas hanedus, not the menorah as the Rebbe suggests. That's Zayin. L'chayre kem Rebbe frag. Rashi b'tchilas ha-parsha firt ois. Rashi, the beginning of the parsha, concludes as the Roif was Cholsha as Daiter Shal Arin, that the fact that Arin felt bad, uh, that he wasn't there in the inauguration when they were bringing the korbanos for the Mizbeach, not him and not your tribe. Hat ihm der Eibishter Menachem given. The Eibishter comforted him. Sha'atom madlik umeiti v'sanedes. You're going to light. You're going to fix the natives. So it's an action that Aaron does. Heißt es doch. That means, as the Parsha read, Bikr v'gam madlik umeiti v'sanedes. Parsha is mainly discussing that he is lighting and fixing the menorahs. Wie stimmt das mit Hanal? How does this fit with the above? As the Teuchen HaParsha, that the content of this parsha is not the Esem Maisa Hadlok of Atova Shel HaNedis. It's not talking about telling us about the lighting of Atova Shel HaNedis. Nor Parsha Menorah. This is really the portion of Menorah telling us how the Menorah is. But is Negeya to the Gufa Menorah, which is important to the Menorah itself. But here the pasuk is saying this was given to Aaron to comfort him that he gets to light the Menorah. Is the beer in them? So the Rebbe says, explanation, Geret Amol Barucha, discussed already at length in the past. As Dibur Havaye, when the Eibishter tells him, Chayecho Shulcho Gedolim B'Shulahem, that by your life, yours is greater than them, Shatomadlik Umeitav Sanedis, that you light and you fix the natives, nit nor that lokas anedis von Aaron Shel Atzmo. It doesn't mean just the fact that you're lighting, Aaron is lighting the menorah, that is greater. And Aaron is lighting the menorah independent of nothing to do with the Mizbeach. When Ados is aggressive, the Chanukah Mizbeach from the Nisim, and that's greater than the inauguration of the Mizbeach of the Nisim through the Karbanos that they brought. No. That's not what it means here. That just Aaron's bringing the menorah, Madlok's Neder, is part of the inauguration. That is what it's greater within the inauguration. Nor, as the Rebbe spoke in the past, nor smeint, Ados vos atom madlik omeitiv Neder is I gather for Chanukah Samaneder. That you're lighting and making the later as well is a definition of inauguration of the menorah. That's part of inauguration of the menorah. In the Alet Softek was the Nisimam Gebrach Zer Karbonas Chanukah Samizbech. In all of the 12 days that the princes, the leaders, they brought the sacrifices to inaugurate the Mizbeach, is the Alet Softek Aaron Madlik Ometiv Zaneda. During all those 12 days, Aaron lights and fixes the natives. But this is together from Chanukah Saminera. That's a defined definition of inaugurating the menorah. Und der Shalcho Gedoyla, and your inaugurating the menorah is in Kama v'Kama Protim Kimevuer Oz is greater in many details as explained then. That within inaugurating of the menorah, that's greater than the inauguration of them in the Mizbeach. Und ikre v'toichme von inyan hachanukah, and the main. So since this is inauguration, so what's the content? What is the idea of inauguration? Is nit azoy de peulas havodah. It's not so much doing the service, the akrova v'adloka shel hagavra, the offering and the lighting of the person that's lighting it, but those was erpoil them gemar hamaisa kedush sachevtza, but that his act impacts the conclusion of the action and the sanctity of the object, hamenoida, was macht meglich the hemshach avoda, which allows for the continuation of the service, hadloka v'atova shel hamneder b'shleimus, that the lighting and the fixing of the will be full. So therefore, what Aaron was doing over here, he was doing Chanukas HaMenorah, which means he was inaugurating, making the menorah well. This is the Chefza. Yes, Hashem told him, Shalcho Gedoyla, but it's not just a lighting, it's an inauguration of a menorah. And that inauguration talks about the menorah itself. And that's why the pasuk clarifies it by saying, V'zeh Ma'aseh menorah. The Rabbi in Ois Ches now is going to explain the idea in Pnimi Sonyon.